Hi everyone and welcome to bioequestrian. Today we decided to talk a little bit about the 2-point. Let's start with when the 2-point looks nice. Most instructors will make sure that your 2-point is close enough to the saddle, characterized by a proper forward lean at the right angle, a stable calf and lowered heel, elbows in at the right angle. Of course, this is right because it is supposed to prepare you to continue gaining qualifications in the sport and riding at a higher and higher level, and in increasing control of the horse. As always with us here, the question arises, why? Where did such a canon of beauty come from? A good and correct 2-point in today's style of English sport horse riding is supposed to prepare you for participation in higher jumping competitions. You will get there by moving up the competition levels. Additionally, where we live, you would have to pass an exam in a style-rated competition to be able to move up. That's where all these elements will make a big difference and add up to a coherent picture that allows you to pass this exam. But that still does not explain where this particular beauty standard came from, and in that case, is the jockey's 2-point in horse racing incorrect? Why do jockeys actually lean so much? The closer to the finish line, the more they lean, and the closer to the saddle they are. Simply, the extent of leaning depends on the speed. The faster one rides, the more leaned forward the rider's torso should be to make this movement easier for the horse. This, by the way, applies not only to equestrianism, but, for example, to motorcyclists. That's just physics. This also means that the slower the horse moves, the more upright the rider's back should be. Here the mystery is revealed for why the 2-point at a walk costs us so much effort and is so much more difficult than, for example, at trot. Your instructor or coach usually sets you up according to an imposed standard and image he has in his head. Because in most jumping competitions we have a time standard of 350 meters per minute, this defines a certain speed at which the show jumping parkour should be completed. Since the speed is constant, it is obvious that the degree to which the human body should be leaning forward is also constant. We all have this image engraved in our brains and strive for it. The bigger the resistance, the higher we stand in the 2-point, and the more hind-end engagement is needed for the horse to push our body's system forward. The closer we are to the saddle, the looser our body works, and the easier it is for the horse to transfer accelerations. That means shoulders back to accumulate hind-end force, and lean forward to stretch the horse's body. With jumping, this makes sense too, doesn't it? Okay, so why should we be just 2 to 3 centimeters above the saddle in the 2-point and not, for example, 10 or 30? And again, why can jockeys ride that way and we cannot? It can be summarized that, after all, we are not practicing for a race, but this is not exactly the case. It also depends, of course, on the length of the stirrups and the type of the saddle. But at the end of the day, it's used to win races, right? Besides speed, here we have some forces that translate into riding dynamics. From physics, we can recall the laws of leverage. In a rider's body, the axis of rotation is the hip. Due to the large forces passing through it, it is so important to place the hip in the right spot. This way, by opening and closing the hip joint, dynamically balancing on the horse, the rider keeps the knee, calf, and shoulder in place. Several key factors come into play here, one of which is the type of the saddle we're riding in, which is why the 2-point in a Western saddle is hard to say the least. Of course, having a belly makes the 2-point significantly more difficult, and the dressage saddle is also not conducive of the 2-point. The length of the stirrups also matters. In reference to this topic, there will be a video about fitting the saddle to the rider properly, but for now, let's just focus on the 2-point seat. Once we have the knee at the right point and the weight on the hip, we want to reach for a stable calf, which is a part of our lever. Basically, if you draw it all out like this, it resembles a hydraulic cylinder system, and that's the function it's supposed to serve. As for the heels down, take a look at our video on riding the post. There, this topic is partially discussed. In a nutshell, it's all about cushioning the forces and relaxing the knee. Now we just need to go over the arms, and we can move from description to action. Elbows in, we say parallel to the spine. This results in better control of the torso tilt degree and better control of the arms. We'll come back to that at the end of the video because this is where really important things happen. Okay, so first up we've got the half halt in the 2-point. It is possible. Take a look at the video on the half halt and note that in the way that we are describing it, you can easily perform a half halt in the 2-point. You do not have to sit in the saddle, press with the bottom, or engage your reins. You can let the horse know about your demands and expectations regarding its balance only by shifting the center of gravity. You just pass the forces through your body along the spine up and down to the stirrups. You then achieve greater engagement of the horse along its spine and make the horse transfer its center of gravity the same as you transferred yours, to the hook joints of the hind legs. If you feel a bit lost at this point, please take a look at the video on basics of horse riding on our channel. Next, we've got maintaining front back balance. This is generally the first challenge of the 2-point. You can notice it best in the transitions between gaits, and we all certainly had moments of rough transitions at first, hopefully not right before a jump. Everyone also experienced moments of hitting the cantle with their bottom. These are the moments when we lose our front to back balance. The 2-point is supposed to enable us to keep our balance, and there is no choice but to simply practice it. The hours of practice will be greatly shortened if you realize that your hydraulic system depicted above is suspended on the lever of the ankle joint. This joint must be movable for us to keep our balance. That's why we talk so much about keeping the heel down. Unfortunately, lowering your heel by force and locking the system, you will not receive any positive effects, because as a result, you will lock your knee immediately afterwards. If you have problems understanding what a heel down means, try putting your toes up instead. Different muscles work, but still the effect for someone watching you from the ground is the same. Note how important it is for the half of the ankle joints and knees to bend your ankles anatomically. Otherwise, they can deteriorate very quickly. That's really important, especially in topics related to horse riding lessons for children. Up at number 3, we've got maintaining our sideways balance. Once we have the front to back balance relatively stabilized, we start thinking about the balance between the right and left side. In the very beginning, riders perform exercises between the right hand and left leg and vice versa. This is what helps to evenly distribute the rider's weight on the two sides. Then we can start exercising on a circle and riding in flexion, and then consciously putting weight on the right stirrup in a jump to land on the appropriate lead. Next up, we've got keeping the horse between your aids. It is very important not to scare the poor animal with our own loss of balance. It is also important to note that the centers of gravity of the horse and the rider should be above each other. For example, do not push the horse with your knee in any direction just because it is easier to support yourself that way. It is equally important to fit the entire frame of the horse between the calves, in the middle, and also between the hands. Again, if this explanation is new to you, then take a look at our video on turns. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them via email or in the comments. You can find our email address in the description down below. Up at number 5, we've got the hip action in the 2-point. Well, as you probably noticed, the rider's pelvis shouldn't be parallel to the shoulder blades, but set at a certain angle. Yep, and that's always tricky at the very beginning of our equestrian education. We try so hard to sit up straight and put our shoulders right above our hips that we don't realize that it shouldn't look like that at all. In most cases, one hip follows the other. For example, the left hip is in front of the right hip, while the shoulders are positioned exactly opposite. In this case, the right shoulder in front of the left. And everything works out when it comes to the distribution of our weight over the center of gravity, and interestingly, when it comes to the vertical line of the seat. So the hip to knee to ankle line. Next, we've got the independence of the shoulders and the hips despite the 2-point. What we're getting at is that the hips and shoulders need to be evenly positioned in relation to each other. It also turns out that in up and down action, they can and should work independently. This can be seen especially when looking at the horse and rider pair from behind. You can see this in our video about the canter and the one about the sitting trot. Number 7, the independence of the calf and not holding onto the horse with your knees. We need this to gain any riding finesse and the ability to do a leg yield, a pirouette, or a half pass, which is also possible and useful in 2-point. It's useful, for example, in parkour to widen the turn without changing the lead, or making shortcuts by doing a pirouette. How would this supposedly be done if the calf and knee were used to keep the rider on the horse? Here we once again circle back to the lever from the beginning of this video. This simply needs to be practiced, and it is best to practice it over pose. Now, transitioning to canter in a 2-point without slamming the saddle and sitting down is most definitely possible. The aids all stay the same. The proper distribution of forces and pressures is possible without placing your bottom in the saddle, and I hope this doesn't surprise you after all. At number 9 we have something you guys probably waited for, so the 2-point over pose and jumps. As for the pole work exercises, you can find most information in our pole work video, and with these accelerations and dynamics, any child can point out that in different phases of the jump, the extent of which the rider is leaning forward varies. Moreover, it didn't always look that way. The modern 2-point appeared relatively recently if we consider the entire history of horseback riding, practically only with the introduction of equestrianism to the Olympics. That is about 120 years ago. That's when the equipment and style of riding began to change. Enough of history. We can all agree that the degree of leaning in a jump or on the pose depends on the speed, so it's different when the horse lifts itself off the ground, different in the flight stage, and again different in the landing. In general, the rule here is the fewer changes the better. Especially the accidental touching of the horse with the calves causes a lot of misunderstandings. That's why there is so much hype about the stability of our calves in the 2-point over the pose and in the jump especially. Now it's time to return to the arms and hands. In general, we need relaxation and balance here. The arms indicate the direction of the horse's shoulder blades, so their positioning is very important for riding precision. The problem with this is that they cannot rush the movement. A common mistake of the 2-point seat is slouching your back and not paying attention to the degree of tensions of the rider's shoulders. And that is what's responsible for the tension of the horse's shoulder blades. Notice how important the horse's shoulder mechanics are while doing pole work. After all, this exercise is designed to strengthen their shoulders. So you can't afford to maintain equal tension of your shoulder blades throughout the entire exercise, from the first to the last pole. After all, the horse has to lift the right leg, push it forward, and move it back again. We can't hang over our horse with our stiff shoulders. Shoulders that are loose and flexible are the element that changes everything and the key to success, especially in jumping over wide obstacles. It is necessary to relax to allow those muscles to work. If we don't want to go back 100 years in history to the days of jumping in a full seat and an inverted bending of the horse's spine, then we need to make sure our shoulders are relaxed. How often do you hear elbows in? It is aesthetically pleasing, but mechanically, it's really about the individual joints folding according to their mechanics, causing as little contact interference with the horse's mouth as possible. It is important that the elbows work forward and not make extra movements that translate into stiffness in the wrists. A huge novelty is the jumping style introduced with the hunter jumping discipline. In a nutshell, the idea is to show the horse's freedom and independence in jumping over natural-looking, wide, and mostly solid obstacles. What's important in this competition is the horse's naturally correct jumping technique, as well as its calmness and maintaining an even rhythm. Wanting to show all this, often the rider during the jump completely throws the reins to the horse, leaving the horse freedom of movement. All in all, it is no wonder that such a riding style involving cooperation and partnership is so popular. Surely this will affect the perception of what looks nice in horseback riding. But let's go through some mechanical correlations of this riding style. The best way to start is to see what happens to the horse's balance if the rider shifts some of his weight forward during the flight phase to loosen the contact on the reins. Let's firstly look at how that affects the horse on the flat, so let's look at jockeys. After all, jockeys have been using this technique forever. Shifting the hands forward helps to rock the horse, which naturally extends the fillet, so one step of a canter. In a jump, especially over a wide obstacle, it helps, and breaking contact with the horse's mouth at the end of this phase causes the horse to rescue the lost balance with a sudden throwing of the legs forward. In a race, you can gain a dozen centimeters in each fillet with this, and that's a lot. All this works similarly in jumping. Increasing the leaning of the rider's body transfers quite suddenly a large portion of his weight to the front, helping the horse to fly to the other side. Suddenly breaking contact over an obstacle, on the other hand, will cause the exact same thing as it did in the races. The horse will suddenly throw its front legs forward and down. Let's see how this influences the jump quality. Over a vertical, in the worst case scenario, it can cause a fault. If you are very unlucky, there is a chance that the pole will land where the horse is supposed to land. Then it is very likely to damage the horse's tendon and cause other injuries. Let's see how it affects jumping over an oxer. Dropping the horse's legs in the middle of the obstacle causes at best a nasty fault, while at worst you're risking the pole from the second part of the oxer catching between the horse's front legs and a nasty rotational fall. We've been seeing too many falls like this lately. Take a look at our video on contact with the horse's mouth if you would like to get some more information on how to maintain a proper contact. I have to say here that we really like the riding presented in hunter jumping. We appreciate the freedom left to the horse and its independence, but a completely different thing is to ride with minimal use of contact with the horse's mouth in show jumping competition conditions. In addition, a hunter jumping competition that requires you to make jumping difficult for yourself to show whether the horse will have a good technique without the rider's help is one thing, and it's another thing to go through a show jumping parkour without an accident. Breeding and training methods are sure to catch up with the market needs in this regard. However, if you don't have the privilege of using a horse specially trained for that and with impeccable front leg technique, use this tool very carefully. Trendy photos on social media are really not worth a broken back or an injury to your horse. And as per usual, we have prepared a little pro tip for you guys. Invest in half chaps. For horseback riding, there's a reason we use high boots. They don't have to necessarily be riding boots, you can just use half chaps. It's insanely important to protect your calf from any minor injuries. Why? Because the human body is really not that stupid. If the calf muscle is constantly getting hit or scraped, then the legs will position themselves differently, so that it's more comfortable. The toes will go outward, the heels will go in, because the heels are less likely to get injured than the calf, and the whole technique can quickly get ruined for this reason alone. This will spoil not only the calf action, but also the whole balance associated with an even anatomical positioning of the ankle joint. At this point, think about whether you want to risk that much for colorful socks and matchy-matchy outfits. Let us know in the comments down below if this was too twisted and complicated for you. We hope not. Maybe something doesn't feel right to you. Remember, you can always email us at bioequestrian@gmail.com. That is in the description down below. Subscribe and give us a thumbs up if you liked the video, and stay tuned for more.